Welcome to the Freedom School, an opportunity to learn about history-bending campaigns and initiatives from across the globe. We are inspired by what the Freedom Schools meant during the Civil Rights Movement in the United States, a place for alternative learning for African Americans, a safe space to discover suppressed stories of courage under oppression, the wisdom of culture, and the determination of many to make the impossible seem inevitable. This Freedom School is part of Spadework, a program that seeks to nurture and develop a new generation of organizers committed to those same principles. Learning about the historical context of these important campaigns and movement initiatives allows us to reflect more deeply about our own current challenges. Inquiring and learning is part of the organizers' Spadework. Organizers are inspired by the people we meet and the stories we share with each other. We also know that this journey never ends, and along the way we find joy and satisfaction in practicing the proven organizing adage. Listen with an open heart to the lessons others have learned and apply what you think makes sense. Then reflect, rinse, repeat. If you are inspired by what you hear, or if you want to support the development of a new generation of organizers through Spadework, then consider making a small contribution to keep this going. Go to www.spadework.school/donate right now, or simply click on the link on the chat screen. Enjoy your time together. Adelante.
Good morning, good afternoon, welcome. My name is Alex Muhammad. I'm born and raised in Chicago, and I currently work as the political training director for the Mass Liberation Project. And in this space, I'll be serving as co-host for Freedom School session along with Larry. Connected to the Freedom School, we recently launched Spadework, which is an 8-month intensive campaign development and training support cohort for organizations and organizers on the front lines responding to systemic racism. We're all really excited to be here and be in this conversation, and welcome to Freedom School. I'll pass it over to Larry.
Thank you, Alex, and welcome everyone. Good morning, buenos dias, good afternoon to some. My name is Larry Solomon. I teach here at the Department of Race and Resistance Studies at San Francisco State University. Among other things, I teach courses in movement history and community organizing. And it's that which really kind of binds these loves of mine together. The Freedom School, you heard Alex talk about Spadework. The Freedom School is an essential part of Spadework, an essential part of any organizer training program where we understand what came before the movement work of today, try to understand, be inspired by, learn lessons from movements, organizing campaigns of the past. So that's sort of the spirit in which we join you today. It's every Monday for the past 7 weeks now. We've told the stories of key struggles. We've had friends and friends of our friends join us, veterans of these movements, to really break down the intricacies of these campaigns and to, again, offer up some really important lessons for today's work. So that's where we hope to go today. We have a really great guest in a few minutes. I'll have Alex introduce him. But before we do, just a couple of programming notes. One is that we are live streaming on YouTube. And YouTube is also the site where the Freedom School sessions that we have already recorded are living. So if you're interested, check out the Freedom School, Spadework Freedom School on YouTube for some really great discussions. We're also going to be devoting most of the second half of today's session to your questions and your insights. So please, I'll probably ask again a couple of times, but use your chat function to offer questions for our guest, to suggest ideas and possible lessons, connections, anything you want. The chat function is yours. We will try to lift those up at some point later in today's session. We are also going to have a respondent from Spadework, one of the organizers currently in training to offer some thoughts and insights, maybe some questions for our guest as well. So that's really the cool nexus between, past campaigns and present work. Finally, before we close today, we're going to preview next week's session, and then just like the last couple episodes that we have left, which are all going to be really great and exciting. So before we do any of that, I'm going to throw it back to my great co-host, Alex Mohammed, who is going to introduce today's guest. Alex.
Thanks, Larry. So today joining us, we have Cesar Ramirez. Cesar is the founder of Mi Comita movement and also a member of the National Anti-Corporation Commission. Cesar is also former director of Council for Citizens Participation. And he's here today to talk to us about the work of Citizens Observatory of Public Services, which he helped found. So thank you so much for joining us today. To jump in, can you tell us where you're joining us in this conversation? And I have a second question. We know that in a couple weeks, Ecuador will swear in a new president. And so we're curious about how you're feeling about that.
¿Cómo están? Muy buenos días. Un honor
Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you all. And in regards to your question, well, I am from Ecuador and I live in the city of Guayaquil. And in regards to the electoral matter, the elections just passed 3 weeks ago. We have a new president in Ecuador. His name is Guillermo Laras.
And how are you? Oh, I'm not sure if you're still going. But yeah, how do you feel about the new president?
Well, first of all, he is a president who won with means of fraudulent means against social indigenous movements. There was some corruption at the ballots. And so he is a president that, responds to the interests of the capitalist class of our country. So this is a pretty important uphill battle in order to regain peace. And one of his proposals is to privatize everything. He wants to sell off a federal bank, and he wants to put all roads in private hands, as well as our entry ports all around the country, as well as all of our refineries. And so this poses a threat to all Ecuadorians. He did propose a process of vaccinating about 9,000 people across the country. And today, in-person classes begin all across the country, but basically classes are opening at private schools. And these are schools that have the resources, to build the infrastructure for safety measures. We propose that the vaccination process should have been completed in order for in-person classes to begin, not only in the private sector, but in the public sector as well. So there's much work to do and much struggle for us to take part in our country.
Yeah, that's a lot. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm gonna pass it over to Larry.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, Cesar. I appreciate you being with us. Before we begin, I just want to, again, let people know that chat function is the place to put your questions. That'll be going for the duration of our session today, but the earlier you get the questions, the more likely your question will be responded to. But I think this is one of the things we're going to kind of focus on today, this privatization movement and the efforts to challenge and defeat it. That's an interesting point about the vaccination program and the schools reopening. We're reopening here as well. Some say too fast, but the infrastructure is always the key. Do you have infrastructure, and is it public or private? So it's an important question, and I know that we're going to hear that story today. So I don't want to delay any further. I'm going to pass it over to our very special guest, Cesar Ramirez from Movimiento Mi Cometa in Ecuador. Cesar, it's all yours.
No sé si estoy hablando lo suficiente despacio como para...
I just want to make sure that I speak slowly enough for me to be understood.
Very good.
Ready. Am I able to share a quick presentation that we made about our observatory so that you all can learn about what we have been working on?
Yes. Sí, please, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
No, es sin audio.
No, there's no audio right now.
Gracias. Les decía que después de esa larga presentación de fotografías, básicamente, era porque quería un poco que conocieran
representing all those photographs. I just was presenting what ended up being 16 years of work From these public services ended up, or this ended up coming because of trying to prevent privatizing public services. That comes from marginal sectors from the south of Guayaquil that are called as Wasmo. In the Wasmo, it was funded in 1990, Micometa, which is an base organization to fight and for the population that live in marginal sectors in Guayaquil. So since then, we've done several programs, projects, initiatives, not only in the fight, but also bringing up attention for the people that are defenseless. We're also part of social movement that fight against the privatization of organizations that also fight for human rights, women's rights, children's rights. We are an organization that in Guayaquil, it's known to form alliances within organizations to fight, to make things reality, not only by protesting, but also so that people can have their human rights. So there are many possibilities and people will believe. For example, if we say that children have a right for recreational programs, we should create those programs. If we say that people should have dignified housing, we've been fighting with people so they can have this property and possibility in a way so that the utopia can get closer to reality. So this has given us strength to be able to start other important initiatives. Ecuador has gone through a government that it's important for you guys to know, who was preceded by Rafael Correa, who was there for 10 years. He's done an impressive communication strategy. Unfortunately, there are 10 years and 4 more years of ex-President Moreno, who just finished his term, that basically with a leftist speech has done those that the right wing wants. So what this has done is to mobilize the Ecuadorian society. He's improved some services and some actions focused on scholarships for development and to fight poverty. And at the same time, he has criminalized protesting and also jailing indigenous people and leaders. So in the 10 years of Rafael Correa and 4 years of Moreno, many leaders, indigenous and general public have been persecuted. It hasn't been easy to talk about this experience. Right now, there are people being detained for asking for their rights. There are teachers who are still detained for doing for protesting. So this is a situation that we've seen in the country and it has been changing. So sometimes the things that they say have been lies. So there's things that have been done, but there's also been terrible things that have been done. For example, when we had an earthquake in 2016 in Ecuador, as Marillas Esmeraldas, there was a 2% increase of taxes and they were able to raise millions of dollars. Unfortunately, this money was not meant to help those affected by the earthquake, but it went into the pockets of the politicians who were in charge at that time and affiliated with that current government. So the same thing happened with the government of Rafael Moreno, who just finished his term. During the pandemic, there was a terrible corruption. While people were dying on the streets of Guayaquil, they were doing business with the healthcare of the country, selling the medications that was for the public to the hospitals. So this was outrageous because in the city of Guayaquil, they didn't know what to do. It's understandable to not know what to do, but to hide in your home, have create an excuse and say that you were sick, you were in quarantine, and you healed, that was a big lie. So regardless of all of this, social movement has continued to get strength. 2019, there was a movement against the increase of gasoline. So now this has changed and the prices have lowered, creating a more stable products, household items. In this sense, we have helped create several coalitions that focus on some topics. For example, in Guayaquil, we created an Alianza for Guayaquil, which is a social alliance and political to be able to confront the objectives that they have to fight a city who does not govern or distributes the resources equally to its citizens. They've increased prices on some household goods who are very exaggerated and who are being questioned by the authorities, and the communication. So we're creating an alliance, a national alliance called Nosotros Ecuador, which is to confront with other organizations like CONAIE, who's the largest indigenous organization, to confront whatever new things come our way. So there is a coalition that has been created in the past 2 years that known in El Quinto Poder Estamos Todos, which we're going to present as a specific example of an alliance that leaves positive, but also has some negatives that we need to take note of that. We're going to present a video, and I would share with you some of the lessons that we took from this alliance. So now there's a new assembly, and we are trying to eliminate some privileges that the politicians have that should not have, not during the pandemic, but especially since most of Ecuadorians don't have such privileges. For example, if you were to govern for 6 months or for 20 months, 20 or 6 hours or 4 years, so they have a stipend of $5,000 and ex-vice presidents of $4,000. And for example, Moreno will receive 2 pensions as a president and as a government official, so he'll be getting double. So please, I want to introduce to you the video of this experience so you can analyze it and share it with you, the mistakes, the limitations, but also the potential that there is when there's an alliance between organizations. So I'll just generalize. In December of 2018, we presented a proposal to law for a legal feature that we have in our constitution, which you can present some proposals to the assembly based on signatures so that this proposal can be analyzed in the assembly. So they gave us the forms and we picked up more than 65,000 signatures across the country to present this initiative that was popular to normalize things. This was a proposal that was created in a collective way that has two articles to eliminate the articles of a law that prohibits this like stipend. But what's most important was we constructed teams within the cities in 21 counties. They were formed through voluntaries. So what we did, we send the forms so they can print and signed, and the people that were canvassing talked about this proposal and capture signatures, and then they will send it to Guayaquil. So this work allowed at the same time to create these different collectives to create an alliance so we can share our common fights, which is very important. Secondly, this initiative, this cause created an impact that was very strong. It took the main page in a lot of the social media and news. There were 192 reports in different channels, printed materials, radio, and television. And also this topic was shared so many times in the social media that until this day, they're still publishing this topic, this privilege to get this type of pension. Also, we gathered last week with the leaders of the current governments to give them this proposal to law to let them know that these packets are in the National Assembly signed for this proposal and that we are demanding for them to discuss this. So during this campaign, we were able to get two candidates to let them know that we're gonna finish this stipend. So one is Perez, who's a leader for the indigenous movement, and the current president. He also vowed publicly that he was going to get rid of this type of pensions. So we've been trying to finish this pensions and we will continue next week to work on them. So we've been talking to some of the leaders and we still need to talk with another leader that belongs to the Creo movement, which is the political party of President Lasso.
In all these things, we have important lessons.
Okay. Las lecciones. Uno.
So here are the lessons. We must have a good analysis to be able to present and bring forth our cause. So having a strategic political analysis when moving forth with our cause and our objectives, that is key. We need to analyze and have a clear overview in order to move forward with our tasks at hand. So we must understand our strengths, our weaknesses, our threats, and via this analysis, we can anticipate any obstacles in the way. And we have faced many obstacles in our struggles in which we've had to adapt our strategy. The other piece is that we can't do it alone. No organization can move forward a cause with on their own. it is important for also developing projects, initiatives, not only during these pandemic times, but it's also important to build alliances because nobody has all the resources available to launch one comprehensive effort. And so these are aspects of where working in coalition and alliances, you can share resources, personal capacity, right? The actual staff effort to be able to launch these efforts. And so on our own, we wouldn't have been able to do so much. Part of this has been working with our constituency to create a public oversight over public resources. But unfortunately, in regards to the water supply in Guayaquil, because we were able to beat those concessions in other areas, unfortunately in Guayaquil, there was a contract that was established for a good amount of time. And so there was a strong fight and battle on behalf of these businesses to prevent the termination of that contract. And at that moment, this company was under the ownership of Mr. Bechtel, who is someone who is from California. And it occurred to us to also sue, but place a lawsuit against the international loans that, each loan had its specific clauses that would allow for us to sue and interject with a lawsuit that would allow us to give us time to do some conflict resolution, to address the issues around some residents whose water supply had been turned off. And this was for many reasons. It was a lack of maintenance, lack of payments. But what we were able to do through this is that we learned that there was some legal leeway for us to use as a launching pad to sue and take action. And so in all struggles, we must have allies, external and internal allies. So within our own communities, in the areas where we live, where we operate, and outside of those as well. The other part is working in teams. Without a good working group and team, with and without the financial resources available to us, when we have a strong team that fully is committed and believes in the cause and the organization, there's people who work for a salary and that is their right, that's okay. But it is incredibly important to count on people that are passionate and committed to these issues and are committed to building the organization, because they then, build out capacity. They have, ability to respond more promptly. And these are people that are committed to, being in front of the media and that are well positioned to be the spokespeople. And so these spokespeople need to be well versed on these issues. And one of the things that is important to take into consideration are the weaknesses of the enemy. Sometimes we think there's things that we need to know about our enemies that we can use against them and to be successful. For example, next week on Thursday, we are proposing a popular an assessment plan in which we, assess how the current public budget is being utilized. And so, in regards to how this has been managed during this pandemic, we are going to assess how these educational campaigns, these resources have been utilized to address the issues. And so we're going to also talk about with the informal labor sector. Here we have so many people from Guayaquil that work in the informal economy. And so we have to address their needs because they are not being allowed to work in peace. And so we will also be presenting on these issues as well. We will also be talking about how there's a current proposal to raise public transportation costs. And they want to raise the fare by about 40 cents. But the matter is that so many people have lost their jobs during the pandemic. And there's a humanitarian law that allowed businesses in our country to fire, to terminate compensation for workers for up to 25 to 30 years of their labor. So instead of using the pandemic as a way to call attention to those who have more resources, the people who hold the most wealth, the millionaires in our country, these are the people who most took advantage to make millions in matters of the food supply, of health. We see an increase, an upsurge in pharmacy chains, right? And so this is a business that is expanding. We see a lot more malls operating, just any kind of chains in different sectors that are opening up. And so this is an advantage to all of the people who work in the informal labor sector. And so this is something that we are going to discuss. And these mechanisms are used to call attention to these matters so that once we formally present these, the government has to address and talk about these. Our constitution is a very rich and in-depth constitution because it was built by the people, because we lobbied so much to make sure that those aspects that the public has truly been vested in reflects that. And it's a constitution that guarantees a lot of important fundamental rights. And so, of course, there's efforts from the government to prevent or limit public participation, right? Because at the moment we are really working to use the legal tools that are in place in the system. And briefly, I want to summarize, and I'm sorry that we don't have the video to show you all, but I want to share, or I want to stop there to see if you all have any questions.
Really valuable lessons. There's a lot of rich ideas to chew on here. I want to actually, if you don't mind, take you back a little bit, because the PowerPoint images that you showed earlier, very striking images, a lot of images of youth also, I noticed. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the organization, the origins of the organization, even the origin of the name, Micometa. what that refers to, and then how maybe that organization has evolved over the years. Because we're talking about this alliance, I'm really curious about your end of the alliance, that your organizational end of the alliance. So could you get a little bit into the organization's purpose and its evolution, please?
Chévere, gracias por la pregunta.
Yes, thank you for the question. Mi Cometa, it was like a playful idea. We would gather at my mother's home years ago and to just build comets with our colleagues. In Central America, we call them by different names, but they're kites, right? And so we made them out of paper and sugar cane, and we would just gather to build little kites. And within that, we started, the kids would start sharing issues that they were having at home, domestic violence issues, kind of family related issues. And that prompted me to go to these kids' homes to speak to their parents and see in what ways we could support, intervene. Sometimes people, out of lack of information, you know, a lack of information, education, support, they utilize violence to raise their kids, right? They don't have the tools and resources to address issues with their kids. And within the pandemic, we've seen so many issues arise because parents are not used to being at home so much with their kids. You know, it's just a shift in dynamics, and people weren't ready for that. And so we saw, you know, cases of domestic violence. And, you know, part of that is also just due to lack of patience in the home. And so that's how we started. This prompted us to start talking to people and leaders in the community. I live in the Guasmo, which is a very popular neighborhood. Over 30 years ago, it was mainly made up of houses made out of straw and sugar cane. You know, what you might know as a favela or just any kind of like, you know, new neighborhood, a very humble neighborhood, similar to kind of what you would see in Peru, like new homes being built that are not in the greatest conditions. And so through these networks of support, you know, we were prompted to build an organization that would allow us to address these issues, but also offer ways to plug into the resistance. So for example, in the beginning, we would advocate for, you know, filling potholes, improving the roads, and, you know, making sure that our community could utilize the roads in a safe way. And this we did with the community. And this effort really positioned us to hold a protest at the city council, and we chained ourselves to different light posts around the building. And at first they did throw tear gas at us. They beat us with batons and they locked us up. They jailed us. Many of us, we were in jail for several days. And so this was an event, as painful as it was, it helped position us and our organization. You know, we had kind of an interesting, curious name, Mi Cometa, which means my kite. But, you know, people, or little by little, people understood that our problems from the Guasmo were not just pertaining to that area, but that other communities in the rest of the city also shared these issues. And so what we did is we visited them, we held gatherings to see how we could, unite and organize and fight, right? Like we were used to not having an adequate water supply. And when we formed Micometa, you know, we had set certain timelines to be able to have access to drinking water. And we discovered that there was a contract, and we didn't know initially that the water supply was under a private contract. In 2003, we were asking ourselves, why don't we have an adequate water supply? And we would ask this to people in other areas, communities in other areas, why don't we have an adequate water supply? And nobody was aware that the contracts were under private management. And we organized and made very creative efforts to call to action to these matters. And finally, we got a copy of the contract. And there we learned about all of the details of what was happening. First, we learned that this was under the property of a businessman named Betel. We were looking for a company name, but it was really just this white man named Betel. Mm-hmm. And this company sold the stocks and sold these stocks off to a much more intelligent company called Veole. This is a very fierce predatory business, and they truly were looking for profit. They're not your typical private company. I mean, they work and enamor community leaders. They give them gifts, help them, and, you know, build interesting projects with them just to save face. But you know, the nature of their intentions is to privatize water, because if you can't pay for your water services, they'll cut off your water supply. And they're still providing a water supply that is not necessarily clean. And so these are things that people started questioning.
So this organization ends up being formed as a tool, and we didn't want to flood or invade the territory of other organizations. So we decided it's to build an observatory to be able to unite the different organizations with a new denomination that's more broad and allows for each organization to have their space, to not replace the power the organizations have, no matter how small it is. So we didn't want to do that. So what we did, we ended up sending an invite to work together to achieve certain things. So we started to create goals. So this observatory, you know, can be across the country. So we need to create alliances and name each alliance to focus on problems, focus on topics, so we can actually create results. I don't know if I was able to answer your question, Larry.
No, gracias. That was very, very good answer. I very much appreciate the depth. And just want to kind of emphasize the point, which was you couldn't have an alliance of, you know, any sort of scope without having these strong grassroots organizations in the beginning, it seems to me. So I really liked the idea of how Micometa sort of emerged and then evolved, really importantly. And I also appreciate, which I want to come back to later, but I appreciate the ability to, one of the lessons you talked about was analyzing the political context. And, you know, maybe we'll talk more about the question around political education with your members, with the community members, because if you have these water companies and these private companies and even the government trying to appeal to the communities in ways that either buy them off or suggest that, you know, that this is the privatization is the only way. How do you counter that? So I maybe we'll come to that question later. I want to throw it over to my co-host Alex Mohammed for her reflections and maybe a question. Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Yeah, I really appreciate the level of detail that you went through to walk us through sort of how your work started. And there were so many kind of really juicy moments and like buckets of work that feel very similar to work that's happened in Chicago. I remember you talking about just right, like the lights, right, traffic lights. We call that stop sign organizing in Chicago, and that's actually how I started organizing, getting more stop signs in right, small communities in the south suburbs, in low income, predominantly Black neighborhoods and Black and brown neighborhoods where we were seeing high rates of like car accidents and people speeding and children getting hurt. There were also a couple really important kind of bits of information that you shared that I think are important to pull out, that show some of the arc of you all's strategy with like pulling in community, starting with the really local work, kind of identifying that that it wasn't just this one community that was struggling with a particular issue, right? But we all sort of have a self-interest in seeing change around these areas and kind of like building broader support and broader analysis around like what are some of the issues. Also think the piece around research, right? Like that you think that you're targeting a specific organization and you can get really specific to like, actually there is this one person, he has a name and a face and deep interest in like exploiting and extracting resources from our communities. And it gives you a really clear path to being able to make a set of demands to a very specific decision maker or stakeholder or power player. And I want to come back to that. That's where my question is around, but I also wanted to name, I really appreciate that you talked about the lack of resources and like safety net for individuals in the informal economy. There's an organization in Chicago called Equity and Transformation, who is one of very few groups in our area that is doing work that is only specific to the informal economy. So I appreciate hearing that work is happening in other places too, and it's super important. I think a lot of times we forget about and disappear the informal economy. So later in the conversation, I would also love to hear more about that. But my question is, so number one, right, like there's so much need and this feels, right, like a massive set of work. And I think a lot of times when we have so much need and there is a massive set of work, the specific demands get really lost or unclear. Could you tell us a little bit about, or like highlight what are the core demands that y'all have around some of the needs that you're trying to meet for community?
Gracias, Alex, por la pregunta.
Thank you, Alex, for the question. Yes, sometimes we do have that issue that once you're in several fields at the same time or topics, we cannot concentrate in the specifics. But to be able to help with this, what we've done so far is generate structures that are organized, that focus on concrete causes. There's a coalition called Services Defenders that focuses solely on services. They have their own leaders so they can go and confront. Right now they're sitting in a meeting with the energy ministry to resolve the issues with electricity. There are people that are doing this. It's a coalition, a web that was formed just to focus on public services, water, sewage, trash, and public transportation. And each one of those groups have their own internal leader. Same thing at a national level. There are topics that are focused in a very specific way. For example, the Quinto Poder Coalition, we are all to unite people to end the privilege of politicians, in this case, the vice presidents and ex-presidents. So this is a coalition that just focuses on this topic. They have their own leader. They're the ones that move around this topic. And whenever it's needed, we all get together to create collective action force, to do a protest, to do a march in Quito. So we take time to coordinate each other. So their role and my role, it's to provoke, to promote, to help with alliances, talk with one, talk to the other, and ask them to activate, ask them to see and analyze how can they support. So that's mainly my work, and I'm able to do it. And when physically, with my peers, we have a direct help to our communities. During the weekends, we support 3 communities in Guayaquil with workshops, all sorts of topics. We also donate food, clothing. We help to sports club. We bring balls. That's kind of the things that we do over the weekend. So the way people see us in a tangible, concrete way, it's easier also to believe on the possibilities and also create alliances. For example, there's a national organization called FECAOL, and last week they were creating a national assembly and decided to become a political party, the Party of El Pueblo. They focuses on field workers to be able to push their agenda to be able to create an electoral force. There's a movement within the indigenous people, but unfortunately they have their own private agenda for indigenous, which is okay, we're not against that. But also they incorporate the voice of those who are not indigenous, and also our own needs because we are not indigenous. We have, people, sector, and that are not part of the indigenous movement. And sometimes we unite for concrete topics like the increase on gas prices, but there's very also specific demands. And unfortunately, national organizations do not take them into account, which is an error, because I think the biggest potential right now is to work from bottom to top, from a small to big, because some of those governmental issues don't support the grassroots, and that's a mistake, and they will find out at some point. But it's important to have national structures as long as that structure interacts directly with those folks that are their base. Otherwise, things can change and become individual projects where you use the power and resources for personal benefits. I think it's great that indigenous have their own indigenous agenda. We're not against that, but if we are united, if there's a political party, they should be a partnership. You know, partnership has, you know, part in it, part of society. That should also include the needs and demands of other communities, of other people. And that's kind of what we do. We do our best. And also, mistakes could be made because sometimes when they want to attack us, people have done some campaigns like Ecuador that it's, you know, they might be attacking my own personal self. You know, they'll send messages to, you know, TV news networks, so they might say dumb things about a specific person. So they do that sort of things too. Because we have the capability to dialogue, to be able to unite people. And not everybody has that capability. And that's something that we need to recognize. Each individual has their own expertise. For example, I'm a bad writer. I'm bad when it comes to theories. If you ask me to write a book, I would say no, because I just don't know. It's not as strong of mine. I can try. In fact, I wrote some things, but it's from a personal point of view. We have a book that's called Vuelo de Cometas, which is kind of recounting the story of mi cometa in the last 28 years. So what I do is I just ask people to write. And I would say this program was successful. Why don't you write about that? And all I did was kind of gather and encapsulate. So that's my gift. But also, I will ask other people to write, you know, research type topics. There's a book that's still current for all Latin America. It's called Agüita Amarilla, or Yellow Water. And I think this song is based on the people who died in, like, you know, bullfighting. And we asked a North American volunteer to write this. So what we did the research, and she wrote the whole book. It's an excellent book. Also the story of Mi Cometa. We asked a volunteer to write the story of Mi Cometa, but to write it in a way, you know, by asking people what were their experience, what do you do, what inspired you, what caught your attention. And there's people who have that gift of writing. And there are some of us who were not born with this star. We have, you know, other gifts. Some are artists. For example, I love music. My daughters are musicians, all three of them. But I do not play a single instrument. I don't, but I like music. I never learned how to play the guitar or the clarinet or the trumpet. You know. But I did create opportunities to bring others to come and teach the youth to learn how to play an instrument. Unfortunately, we have so many things going on that we cannot make the time to learn useful things. For example, talking about, you know, the technology like Zoom, these things are hard for me, especially because I don't know. I know there's tons of potential. I use them, but I do not, you know, dominate them or an expert on them. First, because it's not something of interest of me, but there are others who will know how to use technology in an impressive manner. Even children, they know how to use the cell phone apps better than myself, or some of us. And, you know, if you focus on that, you know, some people sometimes even will open up, you know, such devices to see how they work. I apologize for diverging a little bit when it comes to my answer. If you have any other questions, that will be perfect. Thank you.
I appreciate the depth of the answer, and you sort of anticipated my question, which was about leadership development in the organization, and how much you all involve the people in the community and the organization specifically in developing their own skills and broadening their skills. And I want to come back to the question I had earlier about to what extent you all do in some of those workshops, you do, or you have other people come in, or you have the members lead conversations around the political context. So they're kind of deal with the challenge of all the propaganda coming from everywhere else. How do you make sure that the organization is, kind of politically educated?
A ver, sobre eso ahora estamos usando bastante.
Well, right now we are having a lot of Zoom sessions, a lot of trainings through Zoom, because it's important for and necessary for people to understand and see what's happening in the country. And because we have so many contacts of scholars, of folks who are constantly thinking and analyzing the country's political context. So we invite them to come to our sessions for about 20 minutes around this matter, or just any topic that we identify together. So, next Sunday, we are having a national meeting, and we are going to be talking about a reading on Latin America, and we're going to be talking about this context of the election. There's a very tight race between the candidates in other countries, and we are also very interested in what's going on in Chile. So we've asked a comrade to present on the different matters happening in other countries. And we ask a comrade who is a woman, a comrade who is a man, to come and present on these issues, because it's important for us to have these different perspectives. And we want to be able to have an analysis from a feminist perspective, because unfortunately not all scholars or think tanks come from a feminist perspective. So we need to invite women who are in support of popular movements and have a clear vision from a feminist standpoint on how to address the issues we face. And, there's also people who are not so connected to theory, but they're feminists in practice, and it's hard in our organization. It's hard for people to get close to this theory, right? Because we still have this kind of micro machismo or patriarchal practices that are expressed in our daily life, but slowly but surely we're on our way. And so we also try to, integrate LGBT causes. And basically, it's just about starting where people are at, right? And people have this leftist heritage, this spirit of resistance, and truly machismo exists within that heritage as well. And and yes, outwardly, when we talk about these issues, you may not see it, but within our practices, it's there. And we have to accept that, but also accept the challenge to change. But we do incorporate this analysis within the work we do with the people, so that people can have the information and not be swayed by what they hear in the bazaar or Facebook, social media platforms, because 95% of what they read on social media is made up. Yes, you may have some factual information, some beneficial information, but for the most part, it's not. For example, today, an hour ago, before connecting, we got the news that Keiko had won the 80% of the votes, and Ecuador, you know, some part of the population was celebrating. But you know, these are news that sometimes go back and forth, and they get people really hyped up, and they don't have the adequate information.
Thank you. Around now is where we would usually have some respondents from spade work ask questions. And so one of our respondents isn't able to make it, but we do have a question from Gamila, who is a trainee in the spade work. She's not able to join us by video, but I do want to read her question for you. The question is, were you able to form alliances or work with other organizations in the region, not only in Ecuador, as most of these issues are similar in other countries in the region?
Sí, nosotros tenemos varios.
Yes, we have a lot of allies in the US, and this has been, you know, taken quite some time, years, and folks who we're in alignment with. And these are folks who are in the same struggle against the privatization of public services. For example, you know, within this issue of water rights, we work with two organizations that are in Boston. One is called the USE. I'm not sure what it is in English, but it's Universal Unitarian Services. Something, it's like a foundation established by Universalists, and you know, they were founded quite a few years ago, and they have supported our outreach efforts. And there's another organization whose English name I can't pronounce, but in Spanish it is, you know, accountability. And it's an organization that is aligned with our objectives in resisting privatization. And then we also work with a Latin American organization called Redim Vida, and they are based in Bolivia. And we have a very good relationship with folks in Bolivia who struggled against large companies out there, and that allowed us to be aware of their strategies. And they also, you know, resisted against Bechtel. So Bechtel first bought in Bolivia, and then he came to Ecuador. And so, you know, around the same time that he left Bolivia, he came to Ecuador. And we have other allies in the US. For example, the Brownford congregation that helps us with educational matters, creating scholarships for the kids who are part of Micometa. But a large part of the external work, you know, outside of our projects, the effort that has most weight is done with volunteers. You know, we don't have resources, because it's, you know, when we have some resources, because there's a designated project related to a matter, then we are able to, you know, allocate funds and, you know, in certain cases, cover salaries and wages. For example, right now, we have a national spokesperson in Quito, Andrea Mendoza, and he is coordinating all dialogues, all needed dialogues with the National Assembly in Quito. You know, it may go by another name in other countries, but here we call it a National Assembly. And so, you know, we have to cover his stay and travel costs, and we have to cover his wages as well, because he doesn't live in Quito. And we had to send someone over there because we needed someone to really take on that full-time job of coordinating. And it requires that we invest in these roles. In other communities, we have allies from other organizations that, you know, cover the cost for people in those roles that are part of national delegations, or when we have national actions, right? Together we look for resources to cover the cost of those activities. And that's an ongoing struggle and effort, you know, when we can count on the resources or not. We always find a way, though, because this is not a job for us, right? These are causes that we have taken on as people, as citizens, who have the right to live with dignity, the right to work, the right to have access to the resources we need to live in good conditions. And so this is our struggle and the fight that we take on. And if we are recognized and paid for that, then that's great. It's excellent. That's truly fantastic. But for the large part, this work is a volunteer effort. Sometimes we need to take trips, and sometimes we don't have the funds, but we find a way. But an organization like us, that's not a foundation, right? We're not a foundation dedicated to bringing in money. You know, from the beginning, we have worked or warned organizations that they don't become foundations, because our point of view, we have our own perspective here. I know that there's a purpose for foundations in other countries or areas, but we resist the need to become a foundation, because in Ecuador, we see that when a foundation is established, then, you know, there has to be a proprietor assigned to these, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to be proprietary agents, and so we have had to look for a fiscal sponsor that can act in a collective way, and that has been through establishing associations. And so the observatory, in order for us to request public information, and they would hand it over, but when they started realizing that there was key information that we were asking for, they started asking us about the legal status of the observatory. Right, so we had to find a legal figure, kind of a legal sponsor, without losing our own identity, that would allow us to legally request public information without the need of us, you know, putting our cause at risk, or our values or our principles with which we decided to move forth from.
So yeah, again, Cesar, you're anticipating a lot of the questions, and I don't know if you're able to follow the chat currently. Whenever I teach my classes, I can never look at the chat at the same time. I also don't know how to play an instrument, so I don't have very many skills. But in the chat right now, there's a conversation about how you all are funded, and so you're already answering the questions that people are asking. But there are also some people who are talking about raising money, you know, in a grassroots way. Individual donors who might be able to help cover the salary of organizers. So I understand you're mostly a volunteer enterprise, but you are able to pay some organizers, pay your own salary, pay some salaries, and what would it take for you to cover some of the other salaries? I mean, how first of all, how important would that be for the organization to maybe be able to pay more organizers? And what exactly would that look like? I mean, you can talk about what your needs are.
Ya, chévere, buena pregunta, ¿no? Nosotros básicamente hacemos...
Good question. So some of us do some projects when we want to do some initiatives. Sometimes we get support, sometimes we don't. For example, right now, we have this fight and we don't have funds to cover the salary of the person who's in Quito, so it has to be through volunteer. Same thing happened with some organizations here in Guayaquil. So we appreciate voluntary work, but we also have other internal ways to get resources. For example, we ask some of our peers that we know have a little bit more and can support us. We ask for some voluntary donations. Sometimes we put an X amount of dollar to do certain things. For example, we have a national forum for defending the participation of human rights, and as an alliance, we ask a contribution of $5 or $10 for those who can go ahead and support. Some people sometimes donate, some people don't. So we're always fundraising to have funds. And sometimes we do t-shirts, we sell them, souvenirs, things like that. Sometimes, you know, we sell those stuff to the people, but most of the time it comes from internal funding, donation. In addition, each, you know, different initiatives have their own means of support because it's their own work. Nobody's going to become wealthy or rich. At least, you know, we provide enough amount so they can move around and do their activities.
Thank you, Cesar, for the answer, and more people can continue that conversation in the chat. Alex has a question from one of our respondents, or from one of our audience members. Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. So this question comes from Moira, and it says, our efforts in the state of Oregon to enact reforms to hold electeds accountable, as well as challenge corporate privatization, control of natural resources, water and timber specifically, is made much more challenging as a result of anti-democratic social movement, which is like our version of Trumpism. And so the question is there a similar dynamic in your work? How have you organized anti-democratic social movements who are competing for your base of support? It's a really good question.
No entendí la pregunta. Discúlpame, ¿la puedes repetir de nuevo?
I did not understand the question. Can you please repeat it again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is, so what Myra is saying is in Oregon, and I would argue sort of throughout the country, we are fighting Trumpism, right? So anti-democratic social movement that are using narratives and conversation targeted towards the same kind of base or community of folks that we would be talking to and organizing. And the question is, are you all facing similar dynamics in your region, right, where opposition is also co-opting language and targeting your base for recruitment? And if that is happening, you know, how are y'all navigating that terrain?
A ver, el problema es que recién vamos a pasar, estamos inaugurando un nuevo gobierno. Entonces,
the problem is right now that we have a new government, so we're kind of on the watch to see if they're going to behave in the same manner as previous government, because what did the previous governments do? They create their own unions. For example, in Ecuador, this, there was some central unions, but the government created their own union that are in alignment with their own government. And now that they have the government officials leading, now they kind of help one another, which was the situation with the ex-president Correa. So we don't know how the new government is gonna behave with the current organizations. For example, the Unión Nacional de Educadores, this organization was persecuted. They took away their, type of bank, and so the government basically stole from these organizations. Gladly, they were able to get all of that back, a little bit less, but for them, they were able to get at least the control. So we'll see what happens with the behavior and see if they're going to work for the people, or they're going to try and confront the people, or for their, independence. So they can be three different roads that they can take. So we can really tell at this time. There's not enough facts that lets us see, what the government's going to do. For example, the government left some things halfway to kind of say that they were doing something. So this new government have not continued with that work. They've only said they're going to continue that work. But they are getting some oppositions of right the moment when it comes to privatizing certain sectors. But they haven't really taken any steps to have some sort of law or an executive order. The only thing they did was a communications law, that's not really a threat. It just kind of, points out things that we can also use at our favor. So nobody has really talked about this law because it can really help the way it has been designed. It can help us for this popular movement, indigenous movement. So nobody has said anything, nobody has questioned this law, but we haven't seen other laws. And they haven't really started working on what they proposed during the campaign, which was to have a minimum salary of $500. Now they're saying it's going to be in a progressive way. They're going to increase the wage, $25 per year, while right now in Ecuador, the basic needs, it's $750 to be able to survive. So it is double the amount of what people are earning. In my country, a basic salary is of $400, taking unified, taking account vacations, which is $400. That's the official amount. But now there's this humanitarian law, they can base it on hours. So they might end up, paying you 200 or paying 100, or they can fire you and not give you anything. So they have this law. So there's an other proposal that they're trying to make into law that some legislators are working on. I think we'll know more about it next week. That's reality. So right now, things have not been as bad as they were with Trump. And in Ecuador, the right wing, they're not very well organized. There's some leaders here and there. There's some amplifications in communication means, but there's really don't have what Trump had. We saw that. That was quite a popular mobilization. That was huge. Independently, whatever you want to believe, the fact that you were able to move that many people was quite impressive. I was crazy, I couldn't really understand the images during TV. But here in the country, in our country, we don't have that force, which is great. I am so glad that they're not able to develop that force. And I don't think Latin America has that either. They might be able to win an election. They can repress, they can use their power, but to have a military force that moves the way Trump was able to do, we have not seen it in Latin America, and we hope that we will not get to see that type of force. Because he knew how to pressure where people wanted to be pressured. I don't know. I would like to know your opinion regarding this topic, because it'll be interesting to be able to get some feedback regarding of this popular movement that supported Trump before leaving the White House.
Yeah, Cesar, we're still trying to figure it out too. A lot of it is obviously his support in this country is embedded in the long history of white supremacy and appeals to masculinity, and some of that exists obviously in Latin America also. We know there are parallels, but there's a real distinctive kind of American individualistic white supremacist kind of appeal that his base, is attracted to. And obviously all of the economic agenda is still around privatization and neoliberalism, but it's a population that loves and supports these leaders who feed them that red meat. What your answer is making me realize, though, and so many of our great guests during Freedom School have sounded similar notes, is that as an organizer, you really have to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the community. You have to have an understanding of the political dynamics happening in locally and in the country largely. You have to wear so many hats as an organizer. You have to do the base building and the leadership development and the political education and the fundraising, and all of these things that you're talking about just in an hour plus is dizzying when you consider how much work there is. So I asked this question of all of our guests, and I'm going to ask it to you as well. But since you have to wear so many hats as an organizer, and you've been doing it for so long, I wonder if you have some advice to offer for people who are coming into the work now as organizers, who want to do this kind of work for as long as you've done it. What piece of, I know not to distill it into one thing, it's difficult, but is there a piece of advice you would offer to some of our younger organizers?
Más que consejo, es compartir la experiencia, ¿no?
Mainly, I would like to share my experience. I'm not part of the board members of Micometa. 10 years ago, I said up to here. So there was, group council that was recruited so they can kind of focus on different topics. And I told them, if you need my help or a suggestion, call me, let me know. But there was a whole process before this happened at a national level. During 2000 to 2005, there was a national program to train young adults to become leaders. So we were able to plant the seed of new generation or youth, so when they grow up, they can take other roles. And that is great, because some of them are being leaders within Micometa, others went to different spaces, others have left, others have traveled. Some are presidents or directors of other organizations, or they funded their own organizations. Some of them, they've become, candidates. So we form a new generation. So now we see that there's this need to have a national program to form adolescents, because at this time, most of voters in general terms in my country will be the youth between 16 years of age and 30 years of age. That's the analysis we've been doing. And that's, what we're writing with the base that we had of the group Líderes of Nuevo Milenio. So with them, we're trying to create a national program for the next generations. So we have a generation that are doing active duties, so to say. There's leaders who are, public leaders. I'll send the video, which I really like, because then you can see other actors, not just myself, that have their own voice, that are, a solid leader, because we worry and we try to be proactive and we try to form them to make them, fall in love with this and also give them the training. So what we do is, if they, whenever they, would come, we would see who would have the means to be able to go there, males, females, we will talk to the parents, send them to get trained. Some have been in the United States, some have gone to South Africa. So we have taken advantage, everything that we got, so that these generations can be formed. And also, there are internal processes, that we help form leaders, which is not enough. So we also have to recognize that some have ended up in left-wing parties, and we can't determine that. Nobody owns the destiny of others. We own, our peers. But most of them, are at the very least good parents. So that's the research that we've done. At the very least, they're great parents. They take care of their family and protect them. And I think that's key. And also, we didn't create an ideal education process. Maybe that was a mistake. It was not a formative process with a direction. This was, not to get, the youth, to get them to become a leftist. So it was more to form them and unite them, and then give them the choice. And that's, some people went one way and some people went a different way. So it wasn't a bad investment. It was just an investment, because we're hoping that they're doing good things, at least not being corrupt. So we need to look at that. We're reflecting in this process because we're designing a second one. We have a systematic now approach. We call more than 400 of the youth that participated in this process. We call them over the phone. We contact them to ask them what they're doing, who they're working with, where they're working. And that has allowed us to have the data to see if the process that we used after 20 years, because this was during 2000, 2005, if after 20 years, how this has affected them. There's some data that is pretty impressive. For example, when I said at least they're good parents, that's a good, fact. So we've been gathering this information. There's a peer of mine who's really analyzing all this data, these interviews that we conducted over the phone. to be able to know exactly how to have this new process, what ingredients use, how to feed it better. Because there's some sense, and of course some things they were not done in the best way, but it's interesting. It was a 5-year long process. With them, we did something that's called Expresso Montecristi, which was to have an election each week, a group of youth to gather ideas from the people to put into our new constitution. We did this in 2006, 2007. You know, this youth from different cities, it was great because we had great proposals. You know, they were youth topics, you know, emphasizing public services, also defending the rights of the youth. It was great. This experience was great to have a group of youth each week to a different city and then a different city. This was quite impressive. So we were doing this through a bus to be able to take these trips.
Thank you, Cesar, again, for a very well-rounded answer, and just for everything. The kind of last point there about building movement culture and reflecting on, you know, the challenges, the mistakes, things that are working well, I think is a constant reminder for organizers. We are up against the clock, so I really want to, on behalf of Spadework and Freedom School, give a very special thank you to our great guest today, Cesar Ramirez. We always learn a lot in Freedom School. Today was no exception. We've just got a couple of things to wrap up though. So while we thank Cesar on the way out, I want to throw it over to Alex for a word from our sponsors, and then we will talk about what's coming up next week.
Yeah, thank you so much again for joining us. Word from our sponsors: if you were inspired by the session today and want to keep Freedom School going and Spadework going, then please go to the link in the chat right now and make a donation. Your contribution will go to developing organizers through Spadework. Like I said earlier, Spadework is a new national organizer training program to nurture the next generation of organizers of color. So today, for example, we got a question from a respondent, Gamila. Gamila's part of the first cohort of organizers in Spadework. Back to you, Larry.
Thank you, Alex. And again, also thank you to our interpretation team great interpretation team of Ale and Naira and Abram. Thank you, excellent work as always. So as we wrap up, this is week 7. We've got just 3 more sessions, 3 more episodes that will take us through June. And as you can see here on your screen, next week, we're going to hear from one of our great organizer friends to talk about the history of the United Farm Workers and the grape boycott in the mid-1960s, but a lot of the organizing obviously that went on and before and after that campaign, that boycott. Following that, we have a week 9 that's kind of an interesting discussion. We're going to have based on some recommendations and some of your feedback, we really want to lift up some more of these lessons that have emerged today from Cesar and from the previous sessions about what movement history really has to teach us. And so we'll have movement veterans in conversation with some of our younger organizers today about some of these lessons. And we'll try to draw out some specifics and some broad lessons, but kind of a nice broad conversation that will be coming up in week 9. We're still looking for some themes to highlight, so we'd love to hear from you all. You can hit us up at admin@spadework.school. Certainly, you can contact any of the folks with Spadework. And then finally, week 10, we are wrapping up with the History of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's Freedom Summer. We're gonna have a great scholar and one of the SNCC veterans talk to us as well. I'm going to conclude just by saying thanks to all our guests today again, and thank you to our great audience, our massive global audience. We appreciate you all. It is now on to week 8. In the meantime, take care, be good to each other. We'll see you next week.